Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Thank you for continually following us. We appreciate it. And yeah, here we are.
Yeah,
So I'm
welcome.
gonna, yeah, we saw the discussion. One of the questions that came up was talk about parties. So we're gonna talk about parties.
Welcome to this episode. Yeah, so Roxy, parties. Did you party in high school?
Parties. Okay, here's the thing. Like when you're young and you're a girl, I don't know if guys did this, but we had sleepovers. I don't,
Not so
you
much.
guys, okay, so we had sleepovers constantly. So usually parents were around, but they kind of left you alone and you did stupid stuff like witchcraft. And I'm sure a lot of the other girls did it too, and I forget what it's called when you each have one finger underneath the girl and you try to raise her up. Like I think every girl at our age played that, and I don't know why. It's that thing
What light as a
what
feather,
Virgin
stiff
Mary
as
and
a
the
board.
mirror, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, light as a feather, stiff as a board.
No, there you go. Oh my God,
Yeah.
you remember that.
Well, I think I
Yeah.
remember it simply from watching The Craft back in the day. I never did that one. Did the did the Hail Marys in the bathroom, or was it Bloody Mary?
Bloody Mary.
Bloody Mary in the bathroom. That
Yeah,
scared the
Bloody Mary.
hell out of me. But I think that was more junior high for me. So
Yeah, I mean, we did those things all the way through high school, believe it or not.
okay.
I mean, yeah, it was definitely different. But then as I got older, right, we would go up Angeles Crest, which is kind of up in the mountains, kind of in the foothills, maybe a little higher, and have drinks up there, which is really stupid on a windy road, but it had the best city view and it was kind of like makeout point as well.
Yeah.
So like, a bunch of us would go up there and then everybody would get into their respective cars and start making out with whatever
Making out
guy
in
they were.
cars. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it.
So there was that. And then for us, it was the theater group. They had great parties, but the parents were there and they would take the kids' car keys.
Smart.
So, yeah. So, and they knew, I don't want to say they supplied alcohol, but maybe they did because there was alcohol available. But it was
Yeah.
like the Bartles and James, which was the stuff that we all drank because it was cheap. And I know it started my
Oh,
love of fruity drinks, though. It did
true.
do that.
It was like
It did do that.
well, we refer to it as cheerleader beer. But then again, I played football, so I was on the football team, and those parties were at points very different. So,
Yeah.
but not dissimilar in the sense that we would go out. I mean, I grew up in the San Fernando Valley, but when I was in high school, about the time that partying became a thing, I got moved to Palmdale.
Oh,
No disrespect to the Antelope Valley, but in the early 90s, it was a hotbed of nothing. There was absolutely nothing going on. The mall wasn't even built yet. They were still under construction. So partying in that part of Los Angeles County was literally driving out into the middle of the desert or a campground, with copious amounts of malt liquor. It was usually inspired by a football team member. There was our nose tackle on our team. He threw some wild parties. But he had a huge, his parents had a huge house in the middle of nowhere, 4 or 5 miles beyond where the street lights kind of ended in that
oh
area.
man.
So, and he had acres of land and a barn and a house and a huge kind of driveway that was dirt. So, he'd build a big old bonfire in the middle of his driveway and, there'd be 150 students there all
That's
rocking up with
insane.
their own alcohol.
Parents, I take it, were not home.
I don't even know. They may very well have been home and condoned it and said, "Hey, at least if you're going to party, party at home because I know you'll be safe." And I met a number of parents that fit that description. And though maybe legal gray area, I think it was actually one of the smartest things that parents could do was like, "Hey, we know you're going to go out and do this stuff. Do it at home." Kelly's parents were like that to a degree. So, and it kept things safer, instead of going out and getting drunk and being 10, 20 miles from home on a windy road in
Mm.
your case. It
Hmm.
was just like, hey, have a couple drinks here. Quite legendary. And they were usually after a home game on Friday nights. So we'd play the game and we'd be all fired up because we usually won, fortunately for our team. And then it was just like, party until 1, 2 in the morning and then make your way home somehow. It was well before Uber or anything else. So lots of
Did you have a
inebriated.
designated driver or no? Like it was kind of like,
Sometimes.
mm,
Um, I tended to drink very little. I never really liked beer when I was young. I didn't understand how to drink it correctly, as did most people. Yeah, so I mean, I would drink, but I wouldn't drink to inebriation. Was I always safe to drive? Maybe, maybe not. I never did a breathalyzer, fortunately. Um,
mm,
but I ended up being the designated driver to some degree for various folks. Granted, I had a reputation of being a well, not necessarily reckless, but well, some would probably argue that, but I was a very aggressive driver. So I drove fast. I maneuvered. I drove like I played football. I accelerated and swerved as opposed to slowing down and bracing for impact. So,
did you
enough.
have other, I assume you had friends in the car with you?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. No, there's some very varied stories about me that still hold true, and certain songs that remind people of times that their lives flashed before their eyes, apparently, whilst being in a car with. Um, no, I did drive fast, and I wasn't always safe, and I am very fortunate to still be here in some cases. But
Yeah.
but I also wrecked a lot of cars when I was young too. I kind of went through cars. I think I was in 7 car accidents by the time I graduated high school. Some were fender benders, some totaled the car. That's
Nope.
why my parents put me in
Never.
really big vehicles. I drove around like a '79 Caprice Classic, like an old cop cruiser with
Yep.
seat 6. Could fit 3 in the trunk if you needed to in a pinch. Um,
Yeah.
especially going into drive-in movies. There was that where you'd have like because they charge
Did
per
that.
person.
Yeah, I never ever did a drive-in. I always wanted to, but out here it was not my friends didn't okay. So my friends never wanted to go out of La Crescenta, La Cañada for one. They were not adventurous that way.
Yeah,
So all the parties were within like a 8 mile radius pretty much and never went beyond that. Theater parties were the ones where like my friend, I'm not gonna say her name, but she was my best friend in high school and she definitely would drink and hers thing was a Bartles and James kind of thing.
yeah.
We did do Wild Turkey once though.
Ooh,
That was brutal.
I
That
believe
was brutal.
that. I believe.
Oh, that was brutal. But she wound up talking to a statue, I think, for like 30 minutes.
Nice, nice. I've seen that happen. Not with
Yeah.
Bartles and James, though, with a really powerful pot. Uh,
Oh, yeah. This was just alcohol. Oh, and the Jello shots. That was a big thing.
Jello
One
shots
of
were a big
the
thing.
parties. But they'd use Everclear for
Yeah,
those suckers.
yeah. And you'd have to set them in
Brutal.
the freezer because they wouldn't set otherwise.
Yep.
Yep.
Hmm.
No, I remember.
Brutal, brutal,
Yeah.
brutal, brutal. But they were
Kelly's been a
fun.
Kelly's been accused of a couple of pregnancies as a result of her Jello shots. Um, later in life, not in high school, mind you, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
we went on
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
Jello shot kick in the early 2000s for some of our house parties, and um,
That's
they were
hysterical.
they were dangerous. And she would make a cooler full of them, like hundreds and hundreds of them. She'd spend like a whole week, and not just like straight up just like vodka and cherry. It would be like, here are Long Island iced tea ones that are like 5 different alcohols and
Oh, she
tasted.
went out.
She like went all out. It was magical. But yeah, we've definitely been accused of a couple pregnancies uh, as a result of getting too hammered at our parties as adults. So for what it's worth.
That was, yeah. I mean, and that kind of segues into adult partying, like out of maybe out of college kind of thing. Like,
Yeah, well, we
how did
would
that
throw.
transition for you?
I mean, we would do, a trip to Vegas once or twice a year, and that was usually party time. Um, and we would host a house party or two a year and would invite everyone. And
Mhm.
because LA is so spread out and because there would be drinking involved, a lot of folks just wouldn't show up because it was just too far away. But those that did, would could sleep over wherever there was room on the floor if we got to that place. And some of the parties we got to that place, and they would go, from 2 in the afternoon until the longest one we had went until like 10 the following morning, and people were doing tequila sunrise shots and making breakfast in our kitchen when we woke up. It's like, what's going on here? No one ever left, but because we had a bonfire, we had a fire pit in our backyard, fire up the fire pit, and people would sit around the fire and just talk.
And alcohol is a theme, right? With with all of our partying.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it was kind of the drug of choice. I mean, there was little bits of drugs you'd see in high school, mostly weed, occasionally
Mhm.
methamphetamine, but that was kind of the early days of methamphetamine was the early 90s in California from at least my perspective. And because I was part of the football team and part of athletics as a whole, there was random drug tests. So anyone who was a football player, especially a football player, because we were the, kind of the bigger draw for the school, random drug testing and things like that. And yeah, they were testing for steroids and things like that too, but they were also just testing for drugs. So as a football player, alcohol was the only thing that was safe to imbibe.
I didn't know that. I had no, it makes perfect sense, but I didn't know that they did that. I mean, I suppose that's why the jocks that, never really, um,
Yeah,
you
because you're
know,
always with that
never,
looming threat of a potential
right.
piss test on a Friday before the football game.
Yeah. And like my friend, because we had our cliques, we'll have to talk about that in a
Yeah.
minute. I was kind of the wallpaper clique. Actually, except for my best friend. My best friend was actually one of the most popular kids in school, but I was wallpaper. So, which was interesting because literally I moved in with her for like the last 6 months of my senior year.
Mhm.
And my friend Eric, who and he and I are good friends now, he didn't know I lived there.
Hmm.
See her all the time. He had no idea I lived there. It's like I was literally wallpaper, um, which was fine because I think I kind of wanted to be. But I would go to all the theater parties and they go, "You were there?" I'm like, "Oh, seriously?" The goth kids were cool. I always thought they were cool because they were like Depeche Mode kids, right? They were the ones who would be they just had great taste in music for one. Music was a big thing too when we would party. There
Yeah.
was always no dancing necessarily, but there was always music blaring. Everybody would be singing,
Yeah. Yeah. No, there's always
right?
music for sure. Someone had a really amazing sound system in their car and would just open it up and blast it. Especially when
Yep.
we went to those like really remote parties.
Yep. Yeah. So which clique you were the jock clique, but
No, I wasn't actually. I didn't
I was gonna
really.
say I can't see you fitting in on that.
No, I was a weird one. I was friends in all of the groups to a degree, but I was also a complete loner. So I would hang out with the stoners, and I would hang out with the emo kids and the jocks at points and the theater group. And I was, if anything, I was notorious. I was the wild card. You never knew what you were going to get. I dressed in all black. Go figure. I'm still doing it.
Hello, me
All
too.
black combat boots. Didn't really talk much in class. Had a general like mess with me, I'll kill you kind of vibe. Got halfway decent grades when I focused. Um, Talked my way into and out of you name it. Um, I was the teacher's assistant for detention my senior year. I was undefinable, partially by choice. I didn't want to fall into the clique of being a jock. I did play football. I would wrestle briefly, and then the 10-week report cards would come out, and I would be failing a class because of football, and then I wouldn't be on the team anymore. which was fine. I didn't really enjoy wrestling that much.
Mm.
I would do track in the spring, shot put, just to kind of keep me in some loose level of shape.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
but yeah, I mean, and in high school again, because I got moved to Palmdale from the San Fernando Valley or Canoga Park. So my friend base was also 60 miles away. So as soon as I got a car, it was like every weekend. My first serious girlfriend was a Canoga Park High School student. So I would, Friday after school, if it wasn't football season, I was racing down to the valley and I'd stay the night at my buddy James's house or, whatever, or drive back because it was only 60 miles. And gas back then was cheap, even with a gas guzzling car. So,
Yeah, I didn't drive until I was 21. So I didn't
yeah,
have that luxury. I was always kind of dragged along, right? Um, but a lot of the parties I went to, it was just kind of all of our sleepovers. And I mean, don't get me wrong, we would drink, but it was definitely, if there was a pool or whatever, or we'd invite the guys over at like 10 o'clock, parents would be asleep or gone or whatever, and they'd be in the pool. And I want to say, I think I went skinny dipping once in high school. Like, it's amazing nothing ever happened to us because they didn't. The guys were great, even though we were skinny dipping.
yeah,
Everybody kind of behaved, which was nice. But it was, yeah, that was kind of more, and then we'd normally like the next day we'd go to the beach or we'd go,
yeah,
we'd go somewhere. Um, but like, yeah, the parties I went to, it was never, you know, um, I mean, we had the stoner people and stuff, but I wasn't part of that.
yeah,
So I liked everybody, but I was not part of that group.
yeah. Well, a lot of the
Um,
stoner group kind of commingled with the goth kids. So there was a
mhm.
really kind of weird blending of those two groups, and some of them even went into the theater group. So it was like, and they were genuinely some of my favorite people to hang out with. They had
Mhm.
very different views on things. Not necessarily mind expansion, but just kind of like okay, you see the world from a very different lens. This is kind of cool. And I
Yeah.
was the token jock amongst some of those groups at points. So when certain people were being bullied or whatnot, they'd come to me like, "Hey, can you help?" And it's like, "Yeah, absolutely." So I was kind of the weird anti-bully at points.
That's
I didn't
nice.
I didn't really go after anybody as a bully. I didn't really go that way. I mean, at points I'd show off and be a brash asshole. I'm sure I was that way more than I even remember. But there were many instances where someone was being bullied by someone and I would go after the bully. I was probably the third or fourth largest kid in the high school. Uh,
Okay. You the
so
protector.
yeah, I was protection for certain folks, and I was a starting football player. I was an offensive and defensive lineman, um, and it was always a highly competitive for those positions. So
Oh,
our football team was actually really, really good. So we were, there was a lot of testosterone and a lot of ego and a lot of, yeah, it was wild.
ours were absolutely terrible. Our school was known for water polo, of all things.
That's
It
that's
was,
a harsh sport.
yeah, and I have two friends that played that I still know now. Um, and they were like, the gods of the high school.
Yeah,
Um, because they're tough guys, but our football players were absolutely horrible.
yeah.
We
Well, it's
were
what
okay
the
at base.
school prioritizes.
Yeah. So now as an adult, like you've got two amazing kids that are all grown and
Mhm.
but like I don't have kids. So how did you parent with
Uh,
you and Kevin being who you were as you were younger?
we we very much took the approach of the cool parents. We were very open and candid about, some of our exploits. Not all of them, obviously. Some are better left in the past, and some don't want to be remembered.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure that's true for most people. But we were very open about it. when they were, of their latter teenage years, and we were living in New Zealand at that point, the legal drinking age was 18, or still is 18 in New Zealand.
Ah,
So, we, gave them a gateway wine with dinner, Italian dinner. Hey, we're having a bottle of red here, have a little bit,
mhm.
and taught them the art of pairing. Or, hey, we're going to have, burgers and fries, and let's have that with a beer, and taught them kind of the pairing, and also just it's an enhancement to something, not to go and get just blasted drunk. So we kind of introed them into all of that. So by the time they were 18, it wasn't something new that was always kind of seen as a bad thing, because so many of their friends they would just get blackout drunk. And our kids ended up being the kind of the sane and sober of the group, even though they would imbibe as well.
I was gonna ask that because it's a different country, like, and New Zealand's mainly all outdoors, and
Yeah.
I mean, did they look at partying the way we did when we were younger, or is it
No, no, they didn't. Not
how
at
did they
all.
look at it?
I mean, they certainly went to parties, but it was like, hey, and more Kelly than me. There was, always an open, honest, we're not going to judge you. We're not going to attack you. We're here to help. If you got a
Yeah.
problem, come to us. And so they were really open with us, and we were in turn really open with them. And again, trying to be those, cool parents, but really as a way to ensure that we were aware of what was going on. We knew what they were going to do or capable of doing, because we certainly
Mhm.
did it. But they ended up being far tamer than we were, and part of that
Yeah.
I'm sure is from our parenting style. And
Oh, I'm sure.
the number of times I said, if social media was a thing when I was in high school, I would have probably been arrested for at least something, you know, if it was just my driving alone. Goodness gracious. But yeah, no, they didn't go overboard, but I did hear about some of their friends going overboard, and certainly the drinking culture in New Zealand is something that I mean,
Whole different
I
thing.
I have never seen drunk like I've seen in New Zealand. And that's including 4 years of being a bouncer in LA when I was young. I've seen drunk in New Zealand unlike anything I mean, so blackout drunk that it's like, how are you even standing? I watched a guy traverse a city block whilst holding on to everything vertical he could. I don't know who he was. I was on the
Oh
phone
my
with somebody.
God.
And I'm like, should I call somebody? I mean, he's holding onto this light pole like he's in a hurricane, and then like laying on the ground, and like then getting up, and then like stumbling 3 more feet forward and falling down again. I'm like, he knows where he's going, and I probably shouldn't call the police. I don't want to get him in trouble, but and I assume he made it home safely. And that was early in my time in New Zealand. But New Zealand, because they had this thing called the 5 o'clock swill, there was a period of time of prohibition. And then there was a period of time where you could only buy and consume alcohol for 1 hour a day. So
Oh,
and it was an attempt to reduce alcoholism and domestic abuse and things like that. And I don't remember the years, but I think it carried on until the 70s, actually, where you could get off work at 5, the bar would open at 5, would close at 6.
uh-huh.
And during that time, you could consume as much as you wanted, but at 6 o'clock, you were done. So what would happen is binge drinking, and it created a binge drinking culture that still persists to this day in that country. Um, I've seen folks just completely out of their mind. And it's like, you've been drinking for 12 hours and you've had over, 30 beers.
But there's no crime really there. I don't recall seeing any
No,
car
there's
accidents.
no, no, I mean, most people that are in those situations are walking. They're making good decisions, at least in
No,
that case. Being in Dunedin, where we were, which was a university town, and University of
right,
Otago is considered by many the party school of the Southern Hemisphere, or one of the party schools of the Southern Hemisphere. So they have an annual party on Castle Street where they shut down city blocks. It's condoned by the city because they can't stop it, so better to regulate it than to try to curtail it. Um,
right.
and it's just a sea of university students. Many of them are away from home for the first time, and you'll have a couple thousand kids, maybe as many as 5,000 kids. out there day drinking, like, and starting it early too. So like by 9 o'clock in the morning, you got people just hammered drunk, and then they'll go all day and all night, puke and rally or whatever, toga parties, live music.
Yeah.
It's just wild. I've seen footage of it. I'm not the demographic. I'm too old for that, but I know Cameron went to a couple of them, and it was just like,
Cameron did?
yeah, yeah. I mean, he didn't
That's
get too
weird
drunk.
to
I
think
think,
Cam did.
yeah, no, he went to a couple of them, but I think he was more interested in people watching and friends of his were going to be there. Uh,
Yeah.
he definitely came home a bit tipsy, but nothing too bad. Not blackout drunk.
Not blackout drunk. Yeah, I mean I don't recall going and never anyone getting um definitely not violent drunk. I don't recall saying that at all.
No, no. I mean,
You
you'd
see
see it
that here though.
occasionally. You'd see it here in California for sure. I mean, I remember a number of parties that I attended. A couple of them, knife fights broke out. My
Hmm.
one of my high school football player friends, and I forget his name. But he got stabbed in the hand at a party in East
Oh,
Palmdale, and he was meant to play like the following week on a football game, and he was out of commission. His hand was all wrapped up and things like that. Had the occasional gunplay, but I mean, drive-by shootings were still a thing in California in that time
right.
frame.
Right.
So it was something you were aware of. And if you heard what sounded like might be fireworks, get low. Certainly as a bouncer, I've seen people
Right.
pull guns and shoot at people. But
Mm-mm.
yeah, you'd end up with an element that wasn't from your school, or
Yeah.
that's usually what would happen. I remember there was one party, like we were at some campsite, like 20 miles out of Palmdale. I think we were in like Lake Hughes or something like that.
Uh,
And everyone was drinking malt liquor, and someone had like a keg out there, and
yeah.
and then a group from a rival high school shows up, and they're partying,
Yeah.
and they're hitting on some of the girls from our school, and drunk boyfriends from our school are angry that their girlfriends are talking to these boys, and
And a
it
fight breaks
evolves
out.
from there.
At the parties I went to, like the theater parties and stuff, I don't recall anyone getting into a fight. I recall people doing, stupid stuff like talking to a statue for a half hour. Recall people throwing up in the bushes, or things like that, using the bush as a bathroom kind of
Mhm.
kind of thing, and then go right back out and start drinking again. Um, I think all of the parties sort of revolved around alcohol for the most part. Like there's
Yeah.
some parties not so much because parents were there, but uh, the majority of like parties were alcohol driven.
Yes.
And I
Absolutely.
think we actually would ask like strangers. If there
Yep.
was not an older brother or something, you would kind of wait for the right person to walk by
Yeah.
the liquor store and see if they would buy it for you. And surprisingly enough, a lot did.
A lot did, yeah. No, I remember doing that. I remember there was a couple of liquor stores in Palmdale that were lax. So us bigger high school students that could talk good talk, and
Yeah,
get the 5 o'clock shadow after a week in my case, then rock up and buy a
that's
case of
awesome.
beer, and give some bullshit about, oh, I left my ID at home, whatever.
Uh-huh.
Um, and
That
I
was
got
always a
lucky.
good one.
I got lucky a few times. But yeah, it was older siblings would buy booze, or you'd wait outside for someone who looked like they might be cool to buy you some booze.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Or
Yeah,
you'd
there was
raid your parents' liquor cabinet if your parents drank a lot, because then they'd lose track of what they consumed and what they didn't. A couple friends that fit that
yeah.
description. They'd take like half the bottle of vodka and then pour in like half water. I remember my one friend got caught because his dad was like, why does my vodka taste like water? Like, well, sorry, that,
I
you
wonder
know,
why. Anything more you?
well, I guess the questions I have are for the audience now, and that is, what was your Gen X high school experience from a partying standpoint? And then my other question, which is a deeper one, maybe you want to answer, maybe you don't. If you could go back, would you change any of it? Would you have gone more down the party road knowing that, that era was finite? Or would you
Mm.
have not drank too much that night and gone home with someone you shouldn't have? You know, um, you can keep it anonymous, but I'd love to know if you could go back and change any of it, would you? I wouldn't personally. It shaped who I
I
am.
would, yeah,
For
I
better or
would.
for worse, it did, it shaped who I am, and I'm happy with me. So,
Mhm. But that's a very good question. That's one to think about, like especially then you go at what age? Once I'm in high school, I was fine, but would I have done things differently as like a sophomore? I
yeah,
don't know.
just that high school block, that 4 or 5 years of high school, depending on
Mm.
how your schools broke it up.
But I love those questions. Yeah, audience, I'm curious too. Like, I also would love to know, like, what was your most, not your best memory, but your most interesting memory? Like, mine is watching my friend talk to a statue for a half hour. That
Yeah.
is bar none my most interesting memory of a party because I've never seen it again. So, what was yours? Yeah.
And until next time, well, we'll see you soon.
Sayonara. Bye, everybody.